Hello everybody, this is my second YouTube video, and I made it to complement the first video that I made on 1 Corinthians chapter 11. So this is about women in ministry, and it's 1 Timothy chapter 2. I'm going to start by giving you interpretation that I do not hold, but many complementarians actually do hold. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, with modesty and self-restraint, not with bridled hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women professing godliness. A woman must learn in quietness in all submission. But I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. For it was Adam who was formed first, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into trespass. But she will be saved through the bearing of children if they continue in the faith and love and sanctification with self-restraint. Basically, what complementarians hold as a view is that this comes right before the qualifications of overseer in chapter 3, the following chapter. And it says in verse 12 here, "But I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet." So they're saying that because this becomes right before the qualifications of overseer, that it's saying a woman cannot be a senior pastor. It doesn't necessarily mean that she can't teach at all, but she should not be preaching from the pulpit like on Sunday. And then they also argue that for it was Adam who was formed first, then Eve, and it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into trespass. And they're saying that it grounds it into creation, and so therefore it's not cultural. Now, I also partly agree with that point. I don't believe this passage is cultural, and I don't see any textual evidence of it or any strong evidence that it is cultural. I personally believe that is a flawed interpretation that egalitarians hold, that I'm going to also partly refute. And then also in chapter 3, and let's see, the husband of one wife, and in verse 2, "An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife." And they say, in context, the overseer is always seen as masculine in this passage. So therefore, the husband of one wife, it can't be the wife of one husband. So they're saying that overseer has to be male and should be a man, and it cannot be a woman. Now, I'm going to give you my interpretation on why I don't personally believe that. I don't identify as egalitarian or complementarian. I would only say I would be complementarian in the sense that I believe that men and women complement each other, but they're not necessarily, they don't have different roles in ministry. So let me start, and I will start in let's see, verse 9. "Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, with modesty and self-restraint, not with bridled hair, gold or pearls or costly clothing, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women professing godliness." And so in these two verses, you see it uses women, which is plural. And then in verse 11, it says, "A woman must learn in quietness in all submission." A woman is singular. And like I brought up in the first video, woman can mean wife, and this is the only word in Greek that can mean wife. But its literal meaning is woman, but it's the only word used for wife. And so when it turns singular, it's likely, in a lot of cases, depending on the context, it can mean, wife. A woman must learn in quietness in all submission. Now, a woman doesn't necessarily submit to all men, but she should submit to her husband. So in context, this is one reason why it may actually be referring to a wife. And then verse 12. But I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. Now, man also can mean husband. It's just the masculine version, so it can mean man or husband. And it doesn't say, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over men. It says man, singular. So it's likely referring to a husband. And then in verse 13, for it was Adam who was formed first, and then Eve. And Adam and Eve are the original example of marriage. Adam and Eve were in fact married. And then in verse 14 it says, and it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into trespass. Now, I don't necessarily think inherently every woman is more gullible than men. Men tend to think more with, reasoning and less with emotions, and so they're not so swayed by their emotions. But I wouldn't say that disqualifies every woman for being like a pastor. Some women can actually be quite rational. So you can't say women are more deceived, so therefore every woman cannot be a pastor. There are some women who I believe who are qualified for being a pastor. But she will be saved through the bearing of children if they continue in faith and love and sanctification with self-restraint. Now, something to point out is it says, but she, and this is singular, so it's likely continuing to say, referring to Eve, but she will be saved through the bearing of children. And also there's a footnote in this translation that says, or vindicated. So saved can also mean vindicated. And saved is like, some people hold the view that she will be saved through childbearing, and she won't die because of childbearing. She'll be preserved within childbirthing. And then other people view she's saved in the same sense that a man is saved. She will be saved through the birth of Christ. But I actually think that this refers to the role in marriage. My personal interpretation is that, like in the other place where it mentions childbirthing, when it's talking about widows, he says, I want younger women to get married, manage the house, bear children. So likely it's talking about the role of when you become a parent. And when she becomes a parent, she will be saved or vindicated because she became a parent, and now she's no longer only submissive within the household, but she also has her children submitting to her. And so she's also a leader alongside the man, although she submits to the man, but she's also a leader. And then let's go to chapter 3. And it is a trustworthy saying, if any man aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a good work. And he desires a good work. So yes, it is masculine, but you gotta understand, we're in different times, and the uses of language and the way language worked back then is different than today. And actually, Koine Greek is more similar to Spanish than it is English. And so the way they treat gender in Spanish is similar to the way they treat gender in Koine Greek. And there's a biblical example of when Jesus multiplied the fish and the loaves. He counted only the men that ate, but there was likely women and children. And so it's just odd for us. We don't just only count men. We count everybody in our today society. And also, when in Spanish they say amigos. Now, if there's a group of men and women, or like friends of men and women, they'll say amigos. They only use amigas when the female friends, when it's only female friends. If there's a mix, or if there's only men, they just use amigos. So likely it's saying masculine because that's the way they talked back then, and it doesn't make much sense in English, but that's actually just, they look at gender differently, and their language is different when it comes to that. But it's not that to say that this is all cultural. This is only a nuance, and this is something you need to know when you're reading the Bible, because the Bible was originally written in Greek. And then also the part where it says the husband of one wife, this is talking about marriage faithfulness. It's not necessarily excluding women from being pastors. That's too indirect. It's talking about faithfulness within marriage. Saying the husband of one wife does not necessarily exclude women from being pastor, but it's probably more common for men to be pastors, and it's probably more common for them to be the husband of one wife. It's more common, but it's not necessarily throughout all the church. It can only be men. And then also another thing, throughout chapter 3, you can read it for yourself. It never says a woman cannot be a pastor. It never directly says that it can only be men. And so, if Paul was stating in chapter 2 that women cannot be senior pastor, then why would he not enforce that when he's actually giving the list of requirements for being an overseer? He never actually mentions that as a requirement. So it's eisegesis, it's implying your interpretation to the scripture rather than letting scripture speak for itself, because it never really prohibits women from being a pastor. And that's it for this video. Feel free to read through this chapter yourself. I did not use bullet points this time. I actually taught this enough times with people one-on-one that I felt confident enough to just go without the bullet points. But let me know how I done. Let me know if you think I did better than the last video. And please comment, subscribe if you want to support this channel. I'm doing my best to promote it. I'm trying to share it with a lot of people so that they watch this video. And I'm trying to, build a platform and have a decent audience so that it influences people and it reaches more people. So by you liking, subscribing, it just helps this reach a broader audience. And that's it for today. Thank you.